Coming up on this Friday, the Hillsdale Dialogue, author Danny Silva is back, talking to me about his brand new book, Ransom. Matt Continetti, Ben Domenech, Eli Lake, and of course we begin as we do most Fridays with John Ellis, founder and editor-in-chief of News Items. John, the price of oil is at $82 a barrel right now. You are of the opinion China holds the key to whether it stays there. Can you explain why?
Well, as we know, the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Shutting down the of Hormuz cut off essentially 20% of the world's energy supply, and so everybody assumed that the price of oil would go to 120, 150, 200, depending on who you talk to. Well, it turned out it didn't. It's now in the 80s. It's likely to go lower, and the reason for that is that China has dramatically reduced its imports from the Middle East. And when I say dramatically, by almost half. They've gone into reserves, which they have apparently bountiful amounts, and they have plugged into their solar plants, which are enormous. And so the price of oil, which everybody thought would go up, has actually been relatively stable. Some people think, experts think, that it could go down into the mid 70s, maybe even as low as 65 if China continues to not import the amounts of oil and gas that it was importing before, which would obviously have some terrific knock-on effects, lower inflation, and perhaps even lower federal interest rates. So it's one of those
John,
things where, yeah.
what do you make of the Iran situation? I'm looking at a live feed of the American airlift to the Middle East right now, and it's an air bridge. It's fueler supply, fueler supply. I think it's going to go big over the weekend. What do you think?
I think so. I think you can tell by how close U.S. forces are to the Gulf. I mean, to the Strait essentially, or to Iran. And if more and more assets, as they're called, are closer and closer, then it's likely that it's going to go bigger soon. On the other hand, I've long been of the view that the way to win the war is to say, okay, we've successfully completed phase one. Phase two is blockade and even tighter sanctions. The Iranian economy will collapse, and so we just have to be patient. I think that would be the best course, but I'm not the president, so it doesn't really matter what.
I'm a hybrid between long drawn out war. I would take out the dual use electricity plants just to make it harder on the IRGC and everything. And if there are like Key Bridge to Bandar Abbas, like he did last night, that can get blown up. But then I would do what you suggest because it's going to be an internal revolution. Eli Lake's coming up after you. He's pointed out the history of regime collapse is usually internal, not external. It does happen
Right.
sometimes from external forces, but it's usually internal. Let me turn to the spooky stuff you sent me. The AI exoself. You know what? This is not for me. I'm a boomer. You're a boomer. But you also make the argument the exoself is going to be like a second skin the youngs wear before long. Tell us about it.
Well, I think people are familiar probably with Meta glasses, which you wear and it connects you to the internet and you can take pictures with those glasses and so on and so forth. The next iteration of that is essentially artificial intelligence in your pocket. And that is always on, following everything you do. You can talk to it as you go along throughout the day. It can take notes for you. It can do agentry for you and get you a plane ticket or, call somebody you need to call. When you go to sleep, it'll monitor your sleep. And the thought is a man named Kevin Kelly, who's the founder of Wired magazine. He wrote a terrific column about this in which he said eventually the next generation, not our generation, Hugh, but the next generation, I guess generations, will grow very comfortable with this because they'll have the world's intelligence in their pocket that will tell them how they're doing, tell them what they need to know, tell them where they need to be. And it's totally scary because it's a second self in a sense, because it gets to know you as you talk to it, as you talk to others. It records everywhere you go. And people say, well, that's impossible. But actually, given where Meta Glasses is right now, And it's not at all unthinkable to see Mr. Kelly's vision realized in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
John, I can tell from the bookshelf behind you, you are a reader. And I assume you grew up reading history and great thrillers like Daniel Silva's thrillers and Len Dayton's thrillers and Le Carre, and that was your summer reading. But you had to do your history, etc. I'm afraid the new AI and the new online era will not be readers in the way that you and I were readers. Does that cross your mind? What happens when you basically raise a generation of people who don't read compulsively because of boredom?
I'm concerned about that. I mean, the how you process information, it's been in studies show that if you write it manually on a piece of paper, you process the information better than if you type it on a keyboard. Now we're getting rid of we've gotten rid of the, penmanship, and now we're going to get rid of the keyboard. It's all going to be voice, and that's, you're going to have people who are listening to podcasts, who are listening to, Instagram feeds and so on and so forth. But I think for authors, it's going to be a fallow period. Let's put it that way.
And for people who actually are informed by history, let's talk about the AI data centers, though, that would power the exoself and all this revolution. Who's winning this war? Because both the right and the left are angry about it, but I think the left is angrier.
Well, I think that what's happened in these Democratic primaries, I think one of the sort of secret sauces that the left has deployed is opposition to data centers, which is sort of the symbol of big tech's power. But in the case of the left wing of the Democratic Party, they've also been specifically critical of big tech, and they've been specifically critical of the the power of AI making people, ordinary people, so to speak, powerless. And this is, we saw it with Kathy Hochul banning for 1 year development of any data centers in New York State. She didn't do that because she thinks it's the right thing to do. She did that because the left is rising in New York State, as Mondani being the sort of prime example of that. The one that's most interesting to me is Francesca Hong, excuse me, who is the left-wing candidate for governor in Wisconsin. There's a primary upcoming there. She has used the data center slash big tech issue to her advantage, and it's quite possible she'll win the nomination.
John Ellis, the fracking issue 10 to 15 years ago was glommed onto by the left, and they convinced the American middle for a while that fracking was bad for you until the American middle figured out we like natural gas, we like our houses heated at the old prices, and we want the oil price to be down. Do you think that the campaign against data centers and AI is similar to the campaign against fracking of 10, 15 years ago, and it will eventually turn when productivity is measured and people understand we really need this?
I can tell you a story. My son-in-law is in the alternative energy space, and they are developing a solar plant, if you will, in Hood County, Texas, which is west, I think, of El Paso. I think Hood County, Texas was 82% Trump. And so he's coming down from, alternative energy. He's thinking these people aren't, they're not going to like me. They're not going to like the idea. He said they couldn't have cared less about his solar plant. They were fine with that. What really had them riled up was the building of a data center in Hood County. And so I think what's unusual about this issue is that it unites the right and the left. And so it's a different kettle of fish. And I think people are really concerned about enormous power being transferred to a very, very small group of people. So I don't think it's.
You mean real power, energy, the grid? You mean the grid?
No, I'm talking about real power, like
Oh, political power.
Yeah, or just power. If you control the most important technology, arguably in the history of mankind, and there aren't that many of you, you have the most money, you have the most juice, you have, on and on it goes. And people in Hood County, Texas, or Brattleboro, Vermont, are of a similar opinion that this is not a good idea. I mean, you can unite Bannon with whoever the left-wing strategist is on this issue.
Wow. I have to let that settle a little bit. Hassan Piker and Steve Bannon. Wouldn't have thought about that. John Ellis, editor, founder of News Items, which I begin my day with, and you ought to as well. The Substack that condenses and organizes all the world's news overnight, so you don't have to read everything in order to understand what matters most. News Items from John Ellis. Thank you, John. Eli Lake is the Free Press correspondent who's also the host of Breaking History. Eli, I am looking at the live feed of the U.S. Air Force airlift to the Middle East. It is ongoing, continuous, and busy. What do you think is happening?
I don't know, but I would imagine it might have something to do with Iran. Seems like the president has hinted, at least in his speech last night, that he said wait and see something about. He mentioned he kind of said, and we'll see more in Iran soon. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
John Ellis just speculated that the best way to finish this war is to deliver a big blow and then just keep the blockade in place and see what happens. What do you think of that theory?
Well, my view is that if Trump, it's really Israel and America. If the result of the two wars is that we've taken away the Iranian nuclear program and we haven't suffered a global recession, and there hasn't been other kind of catastrophic effects of that, then that's overall going to be then that's a win. It's not a win on the conditions that we may have hoped initially with the initial decapitation strikes and getting rid of Khamenei. It did not end up in toppling the regime, but I think the regime is much weaker and it doesn't have a nuclear blackmail. And then over time, hopefully, the slow process of military naval escorts of ships in the Strait of Hormuz closer to the Oman side will hopefully mitigate the blackmail of the regime when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, I want to switch to two men who would be president. Ambassador Rahm
Yep.
Emanuel, former mayor of Chicago, former chief of staff to the president, and J.D. Vance, the vice president. Rahm Emanuel gave a speech last week in Tel Aviv that was very specific in his criticisms of Israel. J.D. Vance gave a 3-hour interview that I have not yet listened to. I've read many accounts of, some of them conflicting. I assume you're up to speed on both. How do the two men compare in their approach to Israel, if at all?
It's a good question. I mean, I want to start with Rahm Emanuel, who you had a great interview with, I thought, on the show this week. And I disagreed with his speech. I think he's coming from a place of what he calls tough love. But I think he misdiagnoses the problem in that what he's saying is that if Israel can show a path to a two-state solution and, meet halfway some of, its critics, then Israel will find that its isolation in elements and pockets of the West will diminish and go away. I think he's wrong. I think what the problem is that we've already seen it in the UK Labour Party. The Democratic Party right now is in the process of, at the very least, forming a coalition with people whose views are basically pro-Hamas, that are anti-Western, anti-American, and anti-Israel, and don't believe that the Jewish state has a right to exist. And if you form a kind of, how do I put it? If you form a coalition with a group like that, because of their illiberalism, because they are not committed to our values, they will ultimately end up eating their, the children of the revolution, or they will ultimately end up prevailing by any means necessary. We saw a preview of that this week on the podcast known as Drop Site News, where Ro Khanna, who has recently kind of reinvented himself to pander to this crowd, was repeatedly asked in a kind of struggle session by one of the interviewers, Jeremy Scahill, whether Palestinians had a right to attack Israeli soldiers, and why can't they do October 7th where they attack these military bases? And it was insane. To Khanna's credit, I'm not a fan. He didn't take the bait, but the point is that that's where it's headed. So I just think that Rahm Emanuel is kind of going to Israel, beating up on Israel, and his argument is like, hey, you got to do some of these things, and that'll be the way out of your isolation. And my point is that it's not going to make a difference if you have center-left parties aligning themselves with these hard leftists. Now, in the case of J.D. Vance, my issue with him was more about, he kind of implied that there might be some things, there might be files that connect Jeffrey Epstein to the CIA and the Mossad, but they were probably destroyed a long time ago. That is pouring gasoline on conspiracy theory. You're the vice president. You need to be responsible when you're asked about that. I also think that his theory that the MOU that he was negotiating with the Iranians was somehow sabotaged by harsh criticism inside the United States among pro-Israel supporters of Trump is risible. It was sabotaged because the Iranians are who they've always been, which are a bunch of terrorists who lie. So that was disappointing. But the bottom line is, and I made this case on the commentary podcast, J.D. Vance is not somebody who I think hates Israel or wants to see its destruction, or is overly concerned and is convinced that Israel's become a monstrosity. J.D. Vance wants a grown-up relationship between the United States and Israel. I do too, by the way. I'm in favor of ending the military aid and the military subsidy at this point. So that strikes me as, fairly reasonable, and he's been pretty consistent. If you go back to 2024 and you listen to his speech at the Quincy Institute, what you find is a politician who is making the argument that Israel is a valuable ally because it can defend itself and defend American interests. So on that point, I will just sort of say I think he's okay. I do have a lot of other problems right now with J.D. Vance in this world, and chief among them would be, he still is, I think, an ally and won't denounce Tucker Carlson, who I really do think has launched into orbit. Hugh,
let me ask you, Eli, before we run low on time here, and it might go into the break. I've interviewed the vice president a lot when he was running for Senate, in the Senate, and a couple of times since he's been vice president or nominated. He's always been, Israel is its own country. It needs to do what it needs to do to protect its security, kind of the grown-up attitude. I think both Rahm Emanuel and J.D. Vance are playing the first inning of the long game in the quest for the nomination by going to their left or to their right in the case of Vance. So Rahm Emanuel went to his left, Vance went to the right, just to kind of touch base before you go back to the center right and the center left. Are they doing the same thing for their respective parties? And I haven't heard the Vance interview. I'm just trusting your assertion there.
My concern really about Vance is less to do with what he says about the U.S.-Israel relationship, and it's much more to do with the fact that he seems to be in a position, if you want to say he's tacking to his right now or trying to shore up his base, of not offending a bunch of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, nonsense people. My view is that those people, just like I'm glad that Buckley ultimately led the charge to get the Birchers out of the party. Well, we have a Bircher problem in 2026 on the right, and J.D. Vance at this point has shown me that he doesn't want to offend them. Doesn't mean he's one of them, because I don't think he is. Rahm Emanuel's problem is that he doesn't understand how insipid and terrible the new left populist socialists are that are trying to enter the Democratic Party.
Think longer on that, Eli, because I think it's the same problem for both guys. But you're smarter than I am, so I'll wait to read what you write in the Free Press.
I wouldn't say
or
that.
Say on Breaking History, his wonderful podcast. Eli Lake, follow him on X at Eli Lake. Thank you. Matt Continetti is my guest, head of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And this is my new feature for the young members of my show, New and Rising Stars. I just want to see if Matt is hip. Do you know who this is, Matt Continetti?
No, you. I'm not young and I am not hip. It kind of
It's
sounds like
Max
the
McNown.
Lumineers.
It's
Okay, all
Max
right,
McNown, and he's a big
all right.
deal among the young. So I'm glad to hear I'm not the
Very
only guy that
emotional
didn't know he was
music.
a big deal.
I was so, I mean, I don't know, kind of depressing intro. I'm so geared up to talk about the news of the week, and now I might, have to sip a latte or something and think about
He says
my
I'm a little
life.
bit down, but I'm a lot more free. That's kind of like the world. Let's go to Iran, Matt Continetti. I have just read Rebecca Heinrich's estimate that if there's a ground force, it won't be for long, but there might be a ground force. I listened to POTUS's speech last night. I was kind of disappointed he didn't do more on Iran, but he said stay tuned. And the real-time air bridge visuals are amazing. Everything is going to the Middle East bases. What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, I think the president is preparing to escalate the conflict. And I think what we've seen, Hugh, in the past week is a gradual escalation. And not only a return to combat operations, a resumption of the blockade on Iranian ports, but now also targeting dual use infrastructure in Iran, which of course we've been talking about on this program for months, but taking out some of those bridges, taking out some of those economic facilities, transportation hubs, all part of an effort to seriously degrade and eventually deny Iranians the ability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And so I'd say the preparations we're seeing taking place right now are providing the president options to continue that effort in the coming week.
Congressman Harrigan from North Carolina told me earlier this week we cannot take Karj Island as has been proposed because it's lower than the high ground from which the Iranians could fire onto it. I was unaware of that basic fact, but he's a Special Forces veteran. Were you aware of that fact?
Well, I suppose I was aware that a lot of that coastal topography, as you can see on the map, is elevated. And it's a mountainous part of Iran, which is in general kind of a mountainous country, a large country, but plenty of mountains there. And so you see the drone and missile teams that have been harassing the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz are able to kind of operate within these elevated conditions, kind of sneak in and out and fire at shipping. I think one point Congressman Harrigan made that stuck with me was this idea of boots on the ground and how an operation to siege Karg Island would be different than our incredible rescue operation of the two downed airmen earlier in Operation Epic Fury. This would be an operation where we would seize and hold ground, Iranian territory, and that, of course, would mean that our soldiers would be the targets of drone and missile attacks. And so if we're going to pursue that policy, I think every effort needs to be made to prepare for how the Iranians would attempt to retaliate and attempt to harm our soldiers. So I think that's one reason why President Trump, of course, has always been very reluctant to put boots on the ground unless he knows that the mission is defined, that there's a time set, and that the objectives can be achieved.
The opportunity for other ground troops. Do you think our Arab colleagues, not Israeli forces, but UAE, which is deployed with us to Afghanistan, deployed with us to Iraq, do you think that the UAE and other Arab troops might be involved in such an incursion where necessary?
I'd be very skeptical of that idea, Hugh, mainly because our Gulf allies have participated in some extent in retaliating against Iran, because, of course, Iran has been striking at them since the very beginning of the open conflict earlier this year. But I'm not sure they've been at the forefront, let's say. Certainly not anywhere near where Israel was during the first phase of Operation Epic Fury, Operation Roaring Lion for the Israelis. So I'd be surprised if we saw a deployment of Gulf military assets in any ground operation. Just as I'd be a little bit surprised if there were a major ground operation in the coming weeks.
Matt, I stayed up later than I wanted to. I do Fox and Friends first this morning in the 5 o'clock hour, so I didn't really want to stay up to watch the president's speech. Thankfully, it was only 27 minutes. And I said I stayed up for that. I got the documents down this morning. What'd you make of it and the documents he released, which were heavily redacted? I mean, very heavily redacted.
thought it was a very interesting speech that the president gave, Hugh. I like the fact that he wants to give more of these addresses. I think it's a setting we don't usually see him in. I thought the subject of the speech was very much defined. You know, it previously in the week we had heard it would be a potpourri or a smorgasbord, but he wanted to
Yes.
talk about election integrity. He wanted to talk about the Save America Act. And I really think that's what this speech was about. Marshaling some new evidence, some new disclosures, to say that our election system is vulnerable. It's vulnerable to outside influence. It is leaky. It is not very efficient, for sure, especially when you think of states like California or New York. And it needs to be addressed. And there, I think that the message on the Save America Act is useful for a couple reasons politically. One is it is a defined agenda item, and it's critical for President Trump. Two, it's something that the base of the Republican Party cares passionately about. And right now, the big, I think, challenge facing Republicans ahead of the midterm is a lack of enthusiasm for the election. Kind of a complacency. People are more or less happy with President Trump's tenure in office if you're a Republican. So they need an additional reason to go to the polls. And so what I see in this speech is President Trump giving his voters a reason to go to the polls, to advocate for the Save America Act, and to put on pressure on the Senate to pass it.
You know, the reveal to me, because I did get the first document down on the Chi-Coms, they've got 200 million American voter files. That means they know name, address, and residence. That's very unnerving. Don't you find that to be very unnerving?
Oh, incredibly. I mean, the Chinese penetration of Americans' systems of identification, whether it's a voter roll. Remember the OPM hack many years back,
Oh, yes.
where they seized all the information of government employees over decades. China, we now know, of course, if you look at the mayor in Southern California who was revealed to be a Chinese spy, China has penetrated our society. And so I think it's totally legitimate for the president to raise this issue. We have to be concerned about it, and we have to take steps to secure our voting process. And then we also have to look at the voter ID point, which is something he stressed and which is part of the Save America Act. That is extremely popular initiative, voter ID. It's commonsensical. We take ID everywhere. Everyone has an ID. Obviously, there are a few exceptions that can be addressed, but hard cases don't make for good law, right? People like the idea of voter ID. And again, that's an issue that President Trump knows his voters respond to, and something we see at work in last night's speech.
And he sucker punched a lot of the left that thought he was going to relitigate 2020. And he did not, except for a couple of cues here and there. He really didn't. Let me put before you two exhibits. Ambassador, former mayor of Chicago, former chief of staff to the President of the United States, former member of Congress, Rahm Emanuel, goes to Israel, gives a speech. I discussed it with him this week. Vice President Vance flies to California, does a 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan, which I have not listened to, and I'm leery of clips because of AI and editing, but maybe you know more about it than I do. I think they were doing the same thing, which is playing to a part of their party that they perceive a need to at least be on talking terms with as they quest for the presidency. What did you make of both, and how do you compare each?
All right. Well, just to start with Emmanuel, I mean, Rahm Emanuel's speech, of course, was based on partisan reasons. Rahm Emanuel's thinking of running for president in 2028, and his party has taken a sharp turn against the state of Israel. We saw that just in the House this week, where over 100 House Democrats voted to cut off aid to Israel. 10 years ago, the number would be 0. Now it's 103. And you can just see there, the Democrats are becoming an anti-Israel party. Rahm Emanuel knows it. In his speech in Israel, Emanuel made 3 claims, Hugh, that I truly disagree with. One is the idea that Israel is isolated. Israel's not isolated at all. It counts among its allies the most powerful democracy in the world, the United States, and the most populous democracy in the world, India. Another claim Emanuel made was that, for too long, he says, American support for Israel has been unqualified. We've done whatever Israel wants. And my response to him there is, look in the mirror, Mr. Ambassador, because you worked for 3 presidents, Clinton, Obama, and Biden, whose support was not unqualified at all. I mean, who did, in fact, in Obama's case, did everything he could to create daylight between the United States and Israel. And then the third idea he had is this idea for a 23-state solution, the idea that rather than try to have a two-state solution between Israel and a potential Palestinian state, the settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian dispute should be submerged within a settlement between Israel and the Arab League. But that is just an evasion in my view, because at the end of the day, the obstacle to peace in the Middle East is not Israel. The obstacle to peace in the Middle East is Palestinian denialism, Palestinian denial of Israel's right to exist. That is what has prevented every single peace agreement from bearing fruit. And until the Palestinians change their attitude toward Israel and accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, you will not have any peace. So that is Rahm Emanuel, a speech that he is delivering to an anti-Israel party, but I think that was riddled with errors. For Vice President Vance and his interview with Joe Rogan, I'm not sure actually what the party aspect of it is, Hugh, I have to tell you, because as the Democratic Party is turning against Israel, the Republican Party is not. In fact, the Republican Party is driving out the anti-Israel members. And just look at that resolution I mentioned. It was sponsored by Thomas Massie, a Republican.
Loser.
But who's just, yeah, a Republican loser who just lost his seat to a primary challenge sponsored by President Trump. So who's the audience that Joe Rogan represents and that J.D. Vance is catering to with his comments? It's not Republicans, but it is part of the Trump coalition. It is kind of the newer elements of the Trump coalition that were very important to Trump's victory in 2024. What they're called low propensity voters. They're not necessarily attached to the party structure. They did not like the way things were going under Biden, and they were part of Trump's winning coalition in 2024. And I think what the vice president is concerned about is keeping those voters in a potential 2028 coalition. At the same time, I think some of the claims he made were also ill-founded.
Is it possible? I argued with Rahm Emanuel. There are factual errors in his speech. The United States was not around in 1948. Ike was actually very hard on them in 1956. We were absent in 67. Nixon came in and saved Israel in 73, and that's when the modern. So it was just wrong on fact. Is it possible J.D. Vance is playing to an aesthetic impulse among younger voters, which is it doesn't really matter what you say, but it matters where you say it, and that in the course of saying it, you demonstrate that you're a real person who hasn't been fabricated in a industrial-sized turnout politician's assembly line?
Well, I think there's absolutely a part of that. I mean, think about the Joe Rogan Experience. It's an incredibly successful and popular podcast. It itself became an issue in the 2024 campaign when President Trump sat for a 3-hour interview and Kamala Harris would not appear, right? Because she didn't want to have to talk for that long. She wouldn't have been able to. So J.D. Vance is showing that he can be like President Trump. Again, trying to maintain the winning coalition from 2024 in these coming years ahead of 2028. And then you also raise a good point with the younger generation. I mean, there's no question that the two parties are now polarized on the question of Israel. But younger voters, though, as a whole, they are, it seems to me, are becoming as a whole more skeptical of the U.S.-Israeli alliance. There's clearly rising anti-Semitism among this generation. So if you want to kind of keep them in the coalition as well, you might be saying statements that that Israel's involved in an influence campaign to undermine the MOU when there's no real evidence of that. There are people who had criticisms of the MOU and people who saw Iran for what it was. They were the ones who were saying that this MOU wouldn't work, and guess what? It didn't. But you might want to say, look, we don't need to have as strong a relationship with Israel as we have had in the past if you want to kind of make sure that you have connections and inroads to these younger voters.
I think that's very, very sharp, Matt Continetti, and I look forward to listening to yesterday's commentary podcast, on which I assume you were, but I couldn't listen to it yesterday, and reading your Wall Street Journal Expressions column from today, which again, I'm behind today because of a variety of reasons, but I appreciate the time as always. Follow Matt on X at Continetti. Read them in the Wall Street Journal. Hear them on the Thursday episode of the Commentary Podcast. And Fridays and Tuesdays when we're lucky here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. I may miss you next week, Matt, by the way. I've got to go to Florida, and we'll be guest hosts both of your days next week. I want to remind you, Food for the Poor is running an urgent campaign for the people of Venezuela, and there are tens of thousands who are homeless, more than 5,000 dead, hundreds of thousands have impacted. Your donations are making a difference. You can call them in at 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673, 855-359-4673. Listen to Food for the Poor's CEO and President Ed Rain, who is talking about who are reaching with this emergency drive.
As organizations that, especially driven by our faith and sort of the love thy neighbor message, you cannot walk past the person in need. There's tens of thousands of people that are not accounted for. So the misery in the country is going to be huge. I think what is a little different here is that we are going through, with the State Department, and you can put the politics aside because this is about aid that's going to get through to trusted partners and help those that truly cannot help themselves right now.
And I got to tell you, Ed speaks for an organization, Food for the Poor, that knows what it's doing. You can trust it. We've trusted it for decades here. That's why we partner with them, and we encourage you to give. I have a banner at the top of my website, hughhewitt.com, where you can give securely any amount, $5 to $50,000, whatever you want to give, will go directly to Venezuela, and Food for the Poor makes it happen. And if you're a text person, text my name, Hewitt, Hewitt, to 51555. Hewitt to 51555. They will send you a link that's secure, or you can, of course, go to the top of my website, Help Venezuela bar at the top, or simply call 855-359-4673. I'm in the Relief Factor studio. Time for me to get ready for my 10K in the morning. My shoulders are wrecked, and it can't be helped by Relief Factor. It's going to take probably a surgeon, I'm told, but I am going to have to stay in shape for that, and that means I can keep moving and trundling along. So I've got my Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, and I take it every single day. And you know what? It works. It works because no matter what I did to my rotator cuff, I did not do it to my regular muscle. What did they say? Skeletal-muscular, I don't know what they call it. I don't have any aches and pains because no matter what I do in exercise-wise, Relief Factor covers it. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, or go to relieffactor.com, and you can get for $17.76 a 3-week starter pack. Finally, I want to tell you about America Prays. This is brought to you by our new sponsor. Our new sponsor is freedom250.org, and they are running americaprays.com. As we approach celebrating the whole year long, our 250th anniversary, Freedom 250 is inviting everyone to join the largest prayer gathering online ever. We're inviting Americans everywhere to become prayer partners at americaprays.com. Bring others with them into this moment. Take 10 minutes a week. Pray for our leaders. Pray for our soldiers and our police and our first responders. americaprays.com is bigger than yourself. Go there and add your name to the National Prayer Wall, joining Americans across the country in one unified voice. Be part of America's largest mass prayer ever. Go to americaprays.com. That's americaprays.com today. Welcome back, America. Morning glory and evening grace. I'm Hugh Hewitt, and that is this week's quiz for Ben Domenech, opinion editor at the Daily Wire, Fox News contributor, host of the Big Ben podcast, trying to test and see if he actually knows anything about new music. Ben, you know who that is?
It's Max something, isn't it?
It is. Oh, that's a half point. Max McGowan. McGowan.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I knew it's. There are not a lot of musicians named Max.
Matt Continetti didn't even play. He didn't even try and get in on the game. So you're much. That's probably because of your wife, right? She's the country person, right?
Yeah, actually, you'd be surprised by my playlists. I would think Hugh Hewitt, but yes, I've heard this and I can't always name country songs. You need to listen for a little bit to get something, but this one has come across my radar. So yes.
All right. So I got, this is cultural. We'll get to politics. I can't remember the names of actresses who are under 40. Yeah, they're gone. They come like in The Lioness. We're watching it now, and the fetching Mrs. Hewitt knows who every one of the young stars are, and I have no idea. Do you?
Lioness is that is actually one of the rare entries in the Taylor Sheridan cinematic universe. I should say that I have not actually watched. I know Nicole Kidman's in it, but other than that, no.
Nicole Kidman is in it. She's fabulous, as is everyone in the first two episodes. Grab you, but okay. So I'm glad we're at least for one. Let's get to the serious.
I'll tell you the thing that is true about this though is that what's amazing to me is that there are actresses that you know when you're my age exclusively from trailers for movies that you never see. I think a good example of that. I mean, I have actually seen a lot of movies with her because I think she's a good actress. But Margaret Qualley is somebody who I think, I was having a conversation with the other day. I was like, how many actual movies have you seen with her in it? And they were like, she's in the Tarantino one for about 5 minutes.
You're a millennial though, right? You and your spouse are millennials.
A truly millennial, yes.
What I got asked the other day is who are going to be the opinion makers among the next generation. Now, I know Gen X pretty well. I know the millennials pretty well. I don't know that anyone's risen to the top in Gen Z yet. Has anyone?
The only people who've risen to the top in Gen Z, I would argue, to this point, have been video creators and influencers. And some of those, I think, have been quite creative and innovative. Nick Shirley would be a good example of that. There are I think the people who are going to rise to the top are the people who are already demonstrating a capacity for doing something more than offering opinions. Namely, they're doing reported opinions and the like, or they're digging into things. But look, it's a generation, a Zoomer generation that I am. We have multiple staffers now, not just interns who were born after 9/11, and I sit down with them on regular occasion to do what we call 90s lunch, and we talk through various things that happened, before they were born, basically, that led up to the world that they were in. And they say all sorts of interesting things. For instance, one of them last week was saying, I had no idea that Bill Clinton was so charming. And indeed he was.
Oh.
Yes. There's gaps to fill there.
Okay, you work among a very young demo. And so I'll ask the same question I asked of John Ellis. John is always on Salem News Channel with his books behind him. And when John and I are both boomers, and we're growing up, there's like 3 networks, and they're usually running bad stuff. So you read and you read and you read and you read. You read comic books, and then you read thrillers, and you read Ludlum, and then you read history, and all you did was read. That's going away, Ben. Nobody reads the way that the boomers read because we had nothing else to do. What's that going to do to the political talent in America?
This is the thing that I think is going to happen from that. And I actually can use, again, my own fellow junior staffers who are, obviously if you come and work for the Daily Wire or something like that, you are someone who has ambition to work, potentially in the media political field. The thing that is marked about them is they are always asking me for book recommendations. I've given books to each of our younger staffers in the office, and they're different books, based on their, in fact, this might amuse you. I gave John Podhoretz's book about Hell of a Ride about the Bush campaign to somebody the other day. I gave a copy of Primary Colors to somebody the other day.
Oh, very good, Joe Klein. Yeah.
So you're not just. I think you have to ease them into the point where they're reading Oriana Fallaci or they're going back and So what was this Christopher Hitchens guy about or something like that?
Well, I read deeply in British history. I mean, I know British history, and I'm finishing a new book on Oliver Cromwell and Charles II because it's something I grew up with. It became a passion because it was kind of interesting and weird. I don't think anybody does that anymore, do they?
I think it takes a while for people to get into that. One of our younger staffers, I think that this would be of interest to you, is actually someone who basically wants to read every book that's about Richard Nixon. And right now I've given him a couple, and I think that he's very he's fascinated by a certain period in history. I think that this is going to be the differentiator going forward. If you are a Zoomer who manages to still take time to actually read books, to not just live on the internet, to not just live in the world of Instagram Reels and TikTok and X and everything else, that is going to be the thing that separates you from other people, because you will have the capacity for not just, historical knowledge, but I think deep thought about the differences between those things. You're completely right, by the way. When I was growing up, my family didn't have cable. We didn't. We had the limited networks, and so I literally worked at the local library, and I would take the time at the end of the day to take home a stack of books and that kind of thing. It was a mark then of just sort of starting early. Today, I think it's a mark of standing out within a generation that statistically is just not reading books the way that they ought to.
It will be an enormous advantage. And by the way, I hope you tell that young staffer, although it's not much loved by Nixon people, Nixon Agonistes by Gary Wills is a left-winger's view of Richard Nixon, which is wrong, but it's good. And it's good to have that kind of a... I spent last weekend at La Casa Pacifica's 100th anniversary celebration, so I was deep into Nixon world last weekend. So I'm glad to hear that you've got one. Send them my way if they ever want to be a guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show. We'll talk about that.
Absolutely.
Now let's get to the news. There is an airlift. I'm watching the live stream tracking the United States Air Force airlift. It's massive, Ben. What do you think we're going to do over the weekend in Iran?
Hugh, I'm reluctant to guess, only because I feel like I've been wrong on your program so many times when I thought the president was going to lean so hard into them. But I still think that is the case right now. I think he's fed up. He is fed up with this situation. And, look, I think, and we can talk a little bit about what the vice president did when he went on Joe Rogan this week, but the MOU is in the past. It's in the rearview mirror. It was a punt that potentially had some kind of squeaky way that it might have worked. A lot of us who were skeptical, I think, were proven right by the actions of the Iranians since then. And there is just no defending it anymore. And there's just nothing. I mean, I heard the words from Tom. I heard the quotes from Tom Cotton about this.
Yep,
and I completely agree with him. It's just not. It is not a situation that is in any way stable. We have to, and this is something that I think I appreciated from Cotton, because I think it's important to redefine the nature of what victory looks like right now for voters and people who are listening. And people, who basically kind of tuned this out at some point and have this vague idea that we are losing, which we are not, but also, we aren't winning. Like, we haven't been, we've accomplished great things, but what does victory look like? And I think that's something that Republicans need to understand. They should be defining and then saying, here's what we need to do to achieve this. This is the goal that we have. And that gets rid of the accusation from both right and left that this is going to be some, forever war situation, boots on the ground in Iran situation. That is not, what we're trying to do here. And that's not something that is part of, the president's overall approach to foreign policy. It's never been part of it. And so instead, I think it's important to say, look, this is our definition of what victory looks like. We think we're going to have to take these additional steps in order to achieve it. It is achievable, and we're going to do it.
I hope he does that. I wish he'd done it last night. During the break, we're going to talk about two speeches, or a speech and an interview. Rahm Emanuel and J.D. Vance, because they were both talking to perceived political groups of influence within their party, I think, but we'll compare and contrast. But in the meantime, Senator Cotton said we need to destroy their military ability to project force, and that includes threatening the Strait. Doesn't mean regime change, could mean the collapse follows, but that's doable, Ben. 30 seconds to break. Don't you think that's doable?
It is doable, and it's by doing the things that we haven't done yet, which we've talked about before, the targets that we have not hit and decided not to hit because of, frankly, I think there was this window where they were trying to get a deal done. Now that's over, and so now you got to hit it.
Ben, I have not seen the vice president's interview with Joe Rogan, and I refuse to watch clips because they can be manipulated. So I'm going to have to make the time, I guess.
Yeah, I would encourage you to do so. And yes, again, whenever the danger, by the way, of going on Joe Rogan, and this has to drive political consultants crazy, is that you end up talking for 2.5, 3 hours, and that can be completely manipulated or taken out of context in ways that are completely unfair to the person being interviewed.
That's why I won't watch the clips, because I don't even know if they're real, much less in context. But we have these two parallel events. Rahm Emanuel, ambassador to Japan, mayor of Chicago, chief of staff to President Obama, powerful member of Congress. The Emanuel family is powerful in many ways. He goes to Israel, gives a speech blasting Bibi and Israel and warning them. J.D. Vance goes on Joe Rogan, and I don't know what he does yet, but I've seen stories that allege he's done a lot of things on that. How do you compare those two presentations? And we're going to go into the next segment as well, so take your time.
The thing that I'll focus on the Rogan interview first, just because it seems to me that the vice president is trying to achieve something with this interview, that he's trying to achieve multiple goals. He's trying to humanize himself, which I think he does quite well. But I think he's also trying to reshape the narrative around this MOU and the people who were criticizing him over it, because I think he views this, correctly as being his first major sojourn into foreign policy, where he really owned something within the administration or was viewed as its leading champion, and it didn't work out. And so now he's trying to, I think, reframe this thing. The thing that bothered me, I think, it was you can pick different things out about it, but I still think it is disingenuous to sort of paint this as being a deal that went bad because of any actions on the part of Israel or people who support Israel or those who, view us as having a close alliance with Israel. I did think it was funny that he did something that a lot of people who I think are in the kind of moderate camp do when they're talking about foreign policy, which he said, why can't we just have a relationship with Israel, which is like our relationship with England and France? Number one, have you checked our relationship with England and France recently? Because it's not actually that good. In fact, I would put Japan, South Korea,
Oh, boy. Yeah. Singapore, Australia, you bet.
Yeah. Oh, yes. There's a number of nations I would say before we get to 10 Downing Street. So I look, we can discuss that, set that aside. But look, I think that the mistake that the vice president is kind of making here is one that says that he's kind of trying to appeal to the same people over and over, and those are the people who listen to these podcasts primarily. And I think that the vice president has the capacity. He's shown it before to adapt and to reach across lines that he couldn't have crossed. He said all sorts of terrible things about Trump even after he was first elected president, and he ended up as his vice president. This is a guy who has canny knowledge about politics. You don't get to that point without having it. I think that he is operating here, though, with an attitude that it's just a little bit too online. And so I wrote a piece this week at the Daily Wire. The trend right now for millennial parents is to give their kids a 90s summer, send them outside a ton more, get rid of screens, less and less time with content that's been made since the 90s, and let them have more freedom. I think the vice president needs a break from being online.
When JD goes on Joe Rogan, I think he's making an aesthetic appeal. I haven't even read it yet or seen it. I think he's just making a statement that I can do Joe Rogan to the youngs. Do you think that's part of it?
I think it's a major part of it. He's basically saying, hey, the flex here is I have the capacity to sit down and speak intelligently about all these different topics with a guy who basically, my favorite comparison of Joe Rogan is that he interviews somebody as if he is like a Mongol warlord from the steppes who's just asking questions.
I thought you were going to say Tommy Smothers.
No, go see his tree. Why tree so tall? Explain to Joe. That kind of thing, which is actually, I think, a talent to a certain degree. It's something that. I think if we still had it, would.
I hear there are lizard people under the trees. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So, but the other thing that I think he's doing there is, he's sending I think he's trying to send a message about sort of how he will be different than this current Trump administration. And that's the part of this that I don't like, because I feel like he's just jumped ahead. He's acting as if he's the candidate. As if he's perhaps potentially, just like I'm the foregone conclusion of the nominee, and I'm telling you the kind of
very dangerous
I would have, and that
very,
is
very dangerous because you've got a flank on your left. It's not left wing; it's a left flank of the right wing, and that's open. Give me at least 2 minutes on Rahm Emanuel, Ben, because I think that was a watermark. A high watermark of anti-Israel sentiment in the Democratic Party when you get the mayor of Israel, Rahm Emanuel, whose father fought in the War of Liberation in 1948 to save the state of Israel, to get him to basically hammer Bibi, but he's really hammering all, because Bennett's not going to be different. Eisenhower's not going to be different. They're not going to withdraw from the West Bank. So he's just beating them up, all of them.
No, I think that you're correct about this, and the sadness about this to me is that I really do believe that Israel is very close, and we've seen it happen with domestic issues in the past, Hugh, when it came to the NRA and when it came to the pro-life issue. There have been points in our lifetimes when that was something that was a bipartisan issue where you could get people on board, you could get people from the other side to come across. I truly feel like that Israel has unfortunately ended up in a space, despite all the efforts that the people who have funded different candidates and tried to work, have tried to do, within American domestic politics. They are becoming a monopartisan issue, and that is a dangerous place to be as a country, regardless of what that country is like, and particularly when it comes to Israel. So I am depressed by what I am seeing. I hope that there is going to be some pushback against it. We will see what comes out in terms of the remaining primaries, especially Michigan. But I think that one of the things that we can take away from the last essentially couple of years that have followed October 7th is that the shift that has happened among young people in America, and therefore more sizable among the Democrats than the Republicans, has turned Israel into a monopartisan issue where even people who have supported it in the past have frankly a slowing willingness to say anything publicly. They try to keep their heads down, and you saw that vote, play out in the House when it came to Thomas Massey's proposal. The idea that you would have 100+ Democrats, going along with that, it boggles the mind of the way that they used to be.
Deeply troubling, as it's our most important strategic ally. Got nothing to do with religious tradition, nothing to do with anything else. We need them. They project power, and they have the will to do so, and they're on our team. Ben Domenech from the Daily Wire, Fox News contributor of the Big Ben podcast. Thank you, my friend. Follow him on X at @BDomenech. I remind you, I'm in the Relief Factor studio, and I took it in hour number 1. I'm getting ready for my 10K in the morning, provided it's not smoky out there and I don't have to run through a haze that's deeper than, it's like cutting a haze down in the Beltway. I am telling you, you can get it right now for $17.76, a 3-week starter pack. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. Get rid of those minor aches and pains. Get rid of them. Absolutely, it works. If you got tennis elbow, you got bad shin splints, you've got just a pull, minor aches and pains that come from exercise or aging. That's what Relief Factor works on. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. Or go to their website again, 3 weeks for $17.76, the patriotic price, over at relieffactor.com. Also want you seniors, not seniors, people who are 50 and older, to listen very closely. I'm going to tell you about Consumer Cellular. Now, consumercellular.com/Hugh. consumercellular.com/Hugh. Or you can call 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454. If you are over 50 and you call Consumer Cellular, 1-800-411-4454, you will get one line. You make the change very easily. Keep your number, keep your data, keep all your contacts. Very easy to do. They have real live human beings, best customer service in America. ACSI tells us that. And you get one line, unlimited talk, text, and data. Unlimited for $35 a month. Can't beat that. Number 2, everyone, no matter who you are, they got better rates for you than you're using. No matter if it's unlimited data, 10 gigs, 5 gigs, they got better rates. And if you use my code, Hugh50, Hugh50, you'll get $50 off. If you're over 50, you get both deals. One line for $35 a month, unlimited talk, text, and data. And the Hugh50 code will get you $50 more off at 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454, or go to consumercellular.com/Hugh. Finally, a reminder before we go to break. Venezuela got hammered 3 weeks ago. 2 7-point plus earthquakes. Tens of thousands of people are without homes, thousands dead, hungry, basic necessity needed. Food for the Poor is mobilizing. Listen to Ed Rain, who is the CEO and president of Food for the Poor, tell you what is driving these shipments to Venezuela.
as organizations that, especially driven by our faith and sort of the love thy neighbor message, you cannot walk past the person in need. There's tens of thousands of people that are not accounted for. So the misery in the country is going to be huge. I think what is a little different here is that we are going through, with the State Department, and you could put the politics aside because this is about aid that's going to get through to trusted partners and help those that truly cannot help themselves right now.
It is emergency food, emergency medical supplies, the housing that they can find, tents and things like that, and first aid kits and all the kind of stuff that's got to go. The disaster there is so enormous. Food for the Poor is a trusted partner throughout Central and Northern South America. They have connections to lots of local churches. They are themselves a not-for-profit. Your donation is absolutely tax deductible. You can call 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673. That's 855-359-4673. You can text for a link. Text my name, Hewitt, Hewitt, to 51555. Food for the Poor will send you back a secure link. Or the very best way to give, in my opinion, is to go to my website, hughhewitt.com. At the very top of it, you'll see the banner, Help Venezuela. No matter the size of your gift, $5 to $50,000, $100 to $1,000, whatever it is, you can give it at the banner at the top of hughhewitt.com. It's secure, it's safe, food for the poor, and it simply says, Help Venezuela. Thank you in advance. Thousands of you are stepping up, and we very, very much appreciate your faithfulness. Jonathan Williams is the president, chief economist at the American Legislative Exchange Council, and I'll be with him in Florida next week for Wednesday and Thursday's broadcast, and you can get a ticket to go see that if you go to alec.org/Hugh. 100 people limit in the room there. 1,000 state legislators coming, Jonathan. I hope we talk about the attempts to torpedo school choice in Arizona and Arkansas. What is going on in those places?
Well, I'll tell you what, Hugh, the people that don't like school choice, evidently, which includes teachers' unions in those two states and their allies, have been trying to get petitions certified to go to the ballot to overturn two of the best school choice programs in America, ranking number 2 in Arizona and number 3 in Arkansas, respectively, in our the ALEC report on education freedom that we put out this last year. We were just with our Arkansas delegation this week at the White House. They're very proud of that LEARNS Act that was put into law, signed into law by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Now, Hugh, the good news is in Arkansas's case, they came up short on the signatures, the teachers' unions and their allies. So families and the children are safe for yet another year there and able to take advantage of that amazing school choice program. The verdict is still out in Arizona, where at the time of us talking right now, Hugh, they're still looking at certifying if they have enough petitions for the fall ballot. And then, of course, it will be a massive battle between those against school choice and those that want to support the now 100,000 students across Arizona that are taking advantage of that universal education freedom. So TBD there and more to come, certainly.
We'll be ready to move a cot into the studio, Jonathan, because if that makes the ballot, we will spend all the time we have talking about why they got to vote no on repealing school choice. Let me also give a preview of what we're going to do next week. We're going to talk about what the states are doing. Would you compare for us, for example, Tennessee and Missouri? Because those are two states that have moved up in the rich states, poor states rankings over the last decade.
Well, and they're two states with great ALEC delegations. Tennessee's been a leader. They moved up to number 2 in economic outlook in rich states, poor states just in this last year. Of course, they've always been a state without a personal income tax and a right to work state, and a state that's done a lot of and really important things. They don't have a state minimum wage on top of the federal minimum wage. And so they've been an incredibly quick growing state over the years. Missouri's also done some good things, but they have a ways to go because, as you know, Hugh, Missouri's still not a right to work state. The unions put that on the ballot as a referendum to repeal what the legislature had done a number of years ago. And then what's on the ballot in August is they're looking to become a no income tax state. I know Governor Kehoe's really been a leader on that, as well as a ton of our other great conservatives, the members of Congress, state legislators, fully support that effort to put it into the hands of the legislature to repeal the personal income tax. But the interesting thing when you look back a little bit on this, Hugh, is kind of a tale of two states, if you will. They share a border, but they've really diverged when it comes to their economic policy over the last 25 years, where you go back to the turn of the century or 1998, I guess, they were about the same population size. And as Tennessee stampeded in the right direction by being a no income tax state and a right to work state, Missouri has not grown with the same speed, and they've fallen behind more or less by standing still. So it's a really interesting bilateral comparison, and we'll see how this goes in August, just a few weeks here.
When we talk next week, and again, Wednesday and Thursday, I'm broadcasting live from Orlando with Jonathan and the gang from ALEC, and go to alec.org/Hugh if you want to be a ticketed member in that audience. If you're near Orlando, and we're on right there, and you can drive over from Sarasota or over from Tampa. Do we have states that have gone in the other direction, like year after year, other than California, where they just keep adopting bad policy after bad policy? Tennessee's done everything right. Missouri's doing more things right. Florida did a lot of things right. Does anyone go the other direction?
Well, unfortunately, there's enough of those examples as well. I mean, you look at Virginia recently, you and I have talked about that one a lot, Hugh, and then Colorado. I mean, Virginia at one point was number 3 in rich states, poor states. Colorado at one point was number 2. Now both of those states find themselves in the bottom half of states and have really declined over the last 10 to 15 years, especially.
And they're out population. I thought Colorado still was growing in population, though. Is it still
That's
growing
now
in population?
changed. They had been a population growth leader for many, many years, but that now has turned the corner where Colorado is beginning to lose net domestic migration anyways to the other 49 states, which a lot of folks would have said that's unthinkable just a number of years ago. So I think the bad policies there in Colorado, as we've documented every year, and this decline in rich states, poor states, have really caught up and come home to roost, unfortunately, there.
Jonathan, next week, let's talk about net domestic migration out and in, because I think if people look at just the facts, they're going to find that the red states are doing well because they're smart about the way they operate their states. And that's what we're doing on Wednesday and Thursday, America. Come join Jonathan and the entire ALEC team and me in Orlando. We'll be doing probably 10 guests a day from the state legislatures. Always a great fun time to be had. alec.org/Hugh if you want to join us in Florida. And you do have to be ticketed, though, alec.org/Hugh. I'm so pleased to welcome back author Daniel Silva, whose brand new bestseller, Ransom, is fabulous. And I can't emphasize how I often compliment Daniel Silva about his books. This one is great. Daniel Silva, welcome back. I was trying to think of how to describe this to people, and I'm going to say it's a counter-surveillance escapade like the Lisbon game, only for a reader, because the misdirection is wild, this one. So have you heard that from other Silva addicts?
I actually last evening I was doing an event in suburban Philadelphia, and one of the audience members was questioning me about the complexity of the plot and how it sort of seemed to effortlessly tie together in the end. And how did I do that, given the fact that I don't outline my books to begin with? And it was interesting trying to explain it. But yeah, it is a fast-paced summer read. It's really entertaining. It's part kidnap drama. It is part global thriller. And it does deal with one of the most serious challenges facing the West right now. We all know that Russia is waging a war of conquest in Ukraine. What is less well known is that Russia is engaged in a years-long campaign of sabotage and subversion against the countries of Western Europe. And one of their most effective weapons in their arsenals right now are drones.
So I want people to understand, Daniel Silva knows the GRU, which is the old military intelligence, KGB being the equivalent of the CIA, and the military intelligence being like our defense intelligence agency. And the GRU, as you describe it, Daniel Silva, is the brute force operation. And they're not subtle, and MI6 doesn't like them, or at least the folks out at the cottage don't like them as much as they like the KGB.
I wouldn't say that they like the KGB. The KGB is the SVR is the equivalent of the CIA now. During Soviet times, it was almost its own separate state in a way, and it had border functions, internal security functions. It had, I forget how many directorates there were of the old KGB, but now the new SVR is the foreign intelligence operation. By the way, it does its fair share of wet work and other special operations, but the GRU, specifically Unit 29155 of the GRU, is really a sledgehammer. It has one mission, and that is to destroy liberal democracy as we know it. Vladimir Putin views the very existence of democratic, I'm saying small l, small d, liberal democratic countries in the West as an existential threat to Russia. And he is trying to do everything possible to undermine and subvert them and destroy them, destroy NATO. And in the short term, though, he's trying to punish the countries that have provided aid and sustenance to Ukraine. And I tell you, at the top of his list, Britain is always there, but the country of Denmark, he has a special loathing for Denmark. And then
I thought that came through.
Yeah.
That came, as did the capabilities of our Western European allies. During the longer part of this, which I'll play in 2 weeks, I'll put on the podcast immediately for Silva addicts who want to get a teaser, then go get Ransom and read it. You can get the podcast today, and then after I'm back next week, the week after, we'll play the rest of this interview. But I want to read you from your Pasternak quote, page 214. Remember, you must never under any circumstances despair. To hope and to act, these are our duties in misfortune. How long have you been waiting to use that in a Gabriel Allon novel?
It appeared it was the epigraph actually for The Collector.
Yes.
And I reprised it. In this circumstance to, I don't want to give too much away, but it's a character named Alice Winters, a very important character in this novel. And I wanted to, she comes across as someone who's just sort of interested in being rich and a social media influencer. But actually, when we get to know her a little better, she's a highly intelligent person, and she used that quote. So I reprised it for fans of that previous book.
And I want people to look forward to, I'm not going to tell you much about the character, but there is Oscar, and Oscar's sort of like the new goat that you know from all the Gabriel Allon novels. So Oscar's there for a little bit of fun. I want to know, though, in the short segment, we have 2.5 minutes left. Is Proteus real? I've asked you that before, but I can't remember what your answer is. That's a way to hack into phones.
Yes, it is real. I gave it a different name and a different company. But yes, the way it's used is a little different. But, look, malware, which is what it is very, very common now. We can't live without our phones, but if it were up to me, I would not have one anymore. These things, they have our life on them, and it's so easy to turn it into just a little spy that follows you around. Trust me, everyone in China, their phones they're hacked by the government, and so that capability does exist to turn your phone into a full-time surveillance device. So you're using the microphone to listen, you're using the camera to watch, you're reading text messages, you're reading emails, you're monitoring browsing, you're looking at location data. It's a stunning amount of information that we carry around in our pocket about ourselves.
It is. In fact, you get so much tradecraft from Ransom, especially new info on gate analysis, new info on surveillance techniques. You ought to read it just to make yourself prepared. But it's a fabulous thriller. When I come back after break, and I'll put it on the weekend pod, I'll play it in a week from now. We're going to get more deeper into the plot without giving anything away. But I want to tell the audience there is one perfect way to do this book. Get the hardcover and then indulge yourself and also get the audiobook. So I read the first 3 quarters in hard copy, and then I got the audiobook, and I slowed myself down. I was obliged to slow myself down, and it's much better that way. to read the thriller to the end. Has anyone else done that? Daniel Silva, we got 1 minute. Did anyone do it that way?
I am ever surprised to I'll return to last night. Someone tells me that every year they do the print version and the audio version. I'm very lucky to have an extraordinary actor who does the work on the books. And yeah, so you're not alone.
Oh, I'm so glad, but it does work. That way you don't go too fast. You enjoy it. And this one is so riveting. Daniel Silva's Ransom, everywhere, #1 New York Times bestseller, almost certainly. Keep listening to the podcast or come back in 2 weeks and I'll play you the rest of my interview with Daniel Silva. Time for the Poet Laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe. I hope you had a good semi-sesquicentennial.
Yes, I'm wearing my belated 4th of July shirt for your belated anniversary poem. And it struck me that you've been on the radio 1/10 of the age of our country, and probably in media about 1/5. Does that sound strange to you? It sounds, if I had 1/10 of Warren Buffett's fortune, that'd be a big thing. 1/10, amazing. And I've been with you since your early radio shock jock era.
Oh, shock jock era. 2000, July 10 of 2000, we began. So I'm eager to hear the anniversary poem, Joe.
TV anchors come and go. They have a weak allure. But voices on the radio are voices that endure. We hold them dearly in our hearts, these wise and distant hosts, drinking in the insights from their podcasts and their posts. When the news is naughty, they show the world what nice is. They find the silver in a cloud and guide us through a crisis. The bandwidth is extensive, so many there to choose, but I have one that I prefer to share his news and views. He treats his guests with dignity and all opinions fairly. He'll rage against the airlines, although that happens rarely. Its topics range from poetry to con law and biology, and even thoughts on cinema and ethnomusicology. At times, when tensions tighten, he works to make things looser. Think of what the man could do had he a producer. So trundle on, you Hewitt. The hills are not too steep. Broadcasting your dialogue that is both light and deep. Keep discussion flowing, just as you've done before. Happy anniversary, and many happy more.
Tarzana Joe, thank you. What's the title of that poem?
Happy anniversary, you Hewitt.
Well, I appreciate that a lot, especially that you mentioned my non-existent producer.
Who cares?
Yeah, who cares? And so I really do appreciate that. Will that be posted at tarzanajoe.com?
Yeah, but all the favors that I ask from now on, I don't think I'm going to get from that.
No, yes, you will. Actually, because you have to go through my non-producer, you may not. You have to get Dwayne somehow to rhyme with Bruce Wayne and Dwayne. That's off the top of my head. Has the Tarzana Joe website been overhauled since the show began?
I've just reviewed the final draft. The final electronic draft is beautiful. It's lovely. And I should be able to announce that it's up and running next week. But right now, the old site is up and running. It's even faster than it used to be because the folks at Green Haven are a better lot running it. And the button works, and I'm working too.
Well, thank you, Joe. And if you need a poem for any occasion, America, head over to tarzanajoe.com and hit the button that says, I need a poem. And Joe will get you one as wondrous as Happy Anniversary, Hugh Hewitt. And thank you for that again, Joe.